So hello everyone and welcome to session 2 of our conference, The Next Normal, Engaging Schools with Stories of War and Conflict. My name is Charlotte and I work for Imperial War Museums. I manage the War and Conflict Subject Specialist Network. So the network brings together more than 500 organisations and individuals around the world who look at conflict from the First World War through to the present day. And I'm really pleased to welcome our speaker this morning for our session, which is looking at a project called Make Art, Not War. And now to introduce our speaker. So Robert West was the producer on the project Make Art, Not War, and is the Director for Partnerships and Delivery at Creative and Cultural Skills. This is an independent charity that delivers activities for young people through the National Skills Academy Network and promotes careers advice, guidance and apprenticeships. So I'll hand over to Robert if you'd like to tell us more about your project.
Hello, yes, I've got a fantastic opportunity to tell you about a great project we were involved with the Imperial War Museum called Make Art, Not War. And this was a legacy program from 1418 now, which you'll all know marked the centenary of World War I with some pretty impressive UK art commissions, including poppies rolling down museums and all such exciting things there. What Make Art, Not War aimed to do was encourage young people to nurture some essential creative skills, particularly curiosity, imagination, and to try and find their own voice and their sense of place in what is becoming an increasingly complex and unsettled world. The programme was produced by arts media people and creative and cultural skills, and as I say, supported by Imperial War Museum and 1418 now. It was devised with a small steering group that comprised of Professor Bill Lucas, who is a global creative expert, University of Winchester, and former CEO Pauline Tamberlin, CBE, and renowned artist Bob and Roberta Smith. And Bob was very keen on this programme and was a key driver for it because he was very interested in the idea that following a programme like 1418 now that focused on war, we should, as a legacy, start to do something that focused on peace. And the history of peace is something that isn't necessarily as well documented or looked at in the way that war and conflict is, and yet they are both two sides of the same coin in many respects. So over a 2-year period, what the programme did was produce a series of resources and materials that are still available now, and included some short films by some inspiring artists, including Jeremy Deller and Anna Meredith. And it also had a bespoke mentoring programme that placed emerging artists into classrooms to work directly with young people. Why we used emerging artists was that early on in discussions, something we had to point out to some of the very eminent artists was, although you're an eminent artist, it doesn't mean that A, young people know who you are, and B, that necessarily you are good at working with young people. So we focused on a series of artists who were at the early stages of their career, who had experience of working with young people. But Bob and Roberta Smith provided the provocation to students to explore, and that was, what does peace mean to you? And the point of doing that kind of question was that it was an open question that had no right or wrong answer to. And the way it could be responded to was in any way. It could be done by a painting, it could be done by a performance, it could be done by storytelling. The boundaries were really taken off to allow people to find their own voice in that. Now, over 1,000 young people engaged with that program in year one alone. Year two, of course, fell victim to the coronavirus interventions. But although we did manage to add some exciting parts to the program, one that I would also share with you was a program called 24 Hours of Peace, where the artist Neil Bartlett worked to create a 24-hour non-stop performance that gave witness to testimonies by peacemakers. And that term in itself was used in the widest context. That included obviously people that may be working in war zones, but also included teachers and health workers and all people for whom peace was very important. So we threw this question open very, very widely. And last month, what we did was we pulled together the 2 years of the program. What we wanted to do was, as we'd launched it at the Imperial War Museum in October 2018, we wanted to end it at the Imperial War Museum in October 2020. Wouldn't that be neat? But we did decide we did want a digital element to it because accessibility was becoming a key issue. Could everybody necessarily make it all into one building when this program was UK-wide and thrown out widely? As it turned out, what we had to do was make the whole thing online. But that allowed us an opportunity to engage very widely. So it wasn't necessarily a negative thing. What we did have to do, a bit like today in your conference, was break it up into components and focus on particular issues at each time. Bob and Roberta Smith gave a keynote speech. We then had a reflection on the program as it was. We then had a debate about what the program could leave as its legacy. And Bob offered us another provocation to help focus that evaluation and forward thinking, which was, how do we want the world to change after this? Now, as part of that, we also made a short film where some of the key players reflected on the program. And it's probably best that we share that with you so you get a sense of what's happening. So, Charlotte, do you think we could play that now?
What does peace mean to you? So it's an open question to people. It was the question that people were actually asking in 1918, which was fantastic to ask again in 2018.
CC Skills gave us the opportunity to involve working with some artists directly. It was a national project, and I think that was really attractive because students were able to work firsthand with these people and get them started and inspired on doing the work.
The project was an experience that allowed the students to find a way to connect with people who weren't from their particular subject area. So kind of seeing fashion students working alongside music students to develop ideas.
That it's quite an open brief and it allows the students to respond either in a personal way or in a much wider sort of socio-economic way, sort of looking at wider issues.
It gives learners an opportunity to work with and engage with people who are perhaps a bit further down the journey than they are. And it just gives them that option to pull the curtain back a little bit on what their process is.
And I think being able to respond personally about things that they are concerned about. Not many projects would allow them to be able to do that.
One of my first questions to some of the young people were to think of a creative project that, you know, if in an ideal world you would do to talk about peace. And that for me was one of the most exciting parts of the experience, to see all of these really wild and crazy ideas come into being.
Some of the students had never been to the Imperial War Museum, and they were able to see firsthand and come face to face with the impact of war. And I think seeing it face to face made it much more real for the students.
They didn't have to think about the past, they had to think about the future. You know, I feel that if you're an artist, if you're standing for peace, you can't make paintings while people are dropping bombs around you. Making things, architecture, design, art, needs peace because it needs to last. It doesn't want to be swept away.
We had so many different students come at it from different particular perspectives. I particularly enjoyed perspectives that kind of reflecting that question as a collective. So what does peace mean to us rather than you, maybe? What could it mean for us? What could it mean for a group of people?
These art projects that are happening alongside our collections are incredibly important to us, because that's our audience, and that's how we get inspired to have new ideas and find out new ways to talk about our work and our collections. The conflict history, it's not just about talking about tanks and bombs and guns, it's about having a really broad conversation about what conflict means, and in this case, what peace means.
In a way, it's about that old chestnut about what inspires you. And I found it incredibly inspiring to work with this group of people who are all about the future.
By doing projects such as this, what we learn to do is we learn how to use those creative ideas we have and put them into a practical sense. And that's how we, as artists and creatives, start to develop skills, which then leads on to a craft, which then leads on to a process. But also, we're going to develop people that just think about the world in a slightly different way, because they understand that that creativity is so vibrant and important to the human condition.
Be lovely, wouldn't it, to have peace forever, whether that will happen or not. But I think starting with the students and starting with young people, and for them to start thinking about what that means to them and the impact that that has on their future is really, really key.
It's a big question, actually, how do we want the world to change after this? But it's also an individual question. It's quite exciting in a weird way, because in the past, through most of my life, we thought the future was going to be the same as it ever was. And now we think it might not be like that. And it's about getting that, about setting that conversation going. That's why art is fundamental and a unique subject in the educational curriculum.
Great, thank you for that, Charlotte. So that sums up quite nicely what the program was. What we learned from that, I think, was the value of open questions that no one has the right answer to. And I think that fits very well with your theme about engaging schools with stories of war and conflict, because those different sides to the stories, without being judgmental about it, just this program just allowed for people to do that. Allowing people to respond how they wished to respond was also an important lesson, I think, for us. You saw some of the examples there. One in the film is probably worth pointing out. You may remember the large grey flowing cape that had marks at the bottom, which in fact were soundscapes. So when you went over them, you would hear the memories of people from the Second World War, which was a wonderfully inventive thing that this fashion student had come up with, and had to go and talk to the music technology department about how you would do this and how that would work. So just the very nature of a program that encourages people to collaborate and think differently around it, and in which pretty much anything was acceptable in terms of how you wish to present it back, and what you presented back was something that we learned. In terms of that final event, and this is something, isn't it, that we're all going through, what did we gain out of that? I said earlier about that accessibility of really opening up and having people to come in at all parts was very important. We were aware, however, that, we could have done with a few more young people at that particular thing. And it's not necessarily true that all young people have access to laptops and groups to do that in this way. They have access to phones. So there's a bit more work to do there in terms of how do you really allow young people to engage in the way that they engage with technology at the moment. So I think that's something that we're thinking about in the future. And also, we do miss that face-to-face part and conversation.
I'll draw the session to a close. Thank you so much for telling us more about Make Art Not War. But thank you very much, everyone, and
Great.
bye.
Thanks, everyone.